From my perspective, there are a few reasons why pivoting to and discussing this organization has value. First, and perhaps foremost, is that it serves as a counterbalance to the notion that the Catholic personal prelature of Opus Dei is original, unique, or special in any facet of its structure and charism. And I am including the horrific abuses of conscience and spirituality that Opus Dei has repeatedly been accused of under that umbrella. I have seen people be dismissive of the cult of personality that surrounds Opus Dei's founder, Jose Maria Escriva, because of the fact that the organization is ostensibly divinely inspired, placing it above reproach or error. That idea begins to fall apart pretty rapidly in the cold light of reality. I think that we, myself, the brave individuals who have courageously shared what they endured while in Opus Dei's clutches, as well as the few mainstream media sources who can still be bothered to engage in real journalism, have collectively put a pretty sizable dent in Opus Dei's shiny ego. Yet, even so, it is impossible to deny that the organization still maintains an aura of untouchability and uniqueness. So I am here today to provide additional context and perspective of Opus Dei through the examination of another scandal-rife Catholic organization, the Legionaries of Christ and the Regnum Christi Federation. Because the sad truth is that there is nothing special about Opus Dei, and unfortunately that extends even to the organization's alleged crimes, scandals, failures, and shortcomings. And for anyone who feels the need to comment on my continued coverage of Opus Dei, I would like to remind them that as of recording this episode today, August 3rd, 2024, Opus Dei has yet to substantially and honestly engage with, acknowledge, and seek justice for the large and growing number of former members who have spoken out in the press alleging grooming, labor trafficking, and spiritual abuse. And a PR statement with an email address does not, in my view, constitute substantial and sincere appreciation for the lived realities of the victim survivors, and I refuse to pretend otherwise. And as we will learn later in this episode, Opus Dei is not the only or first Catholic organization to resort to strawmanning, deflection, and deceit in order to protect its image. The conversation about the Legionaries of Christ is extremely lengthy and involved. I did my best to include everything that I felt could be relevant in my outline, but everything that we will discuss today really is just the tip of the iceberg. It's a situation that is continuing to evolve even to present day, as the full reality of the lengths the Legionaries of Christ and the Roman Catholic Church went to in order to protect its asset, the organization's founder, are still being revealed. If what I go over today piques your interest, I encourage you to use my references as a launch point for your own deep dive. In light of everything that I have learned about Opus Dei and the Legionaries of Christ / Regnum Christi, it seems pretty evident that there is a metastasized cancer lurking beneath the church's exterior, and that it is not a simple matter of a few bad apples. But I may be getting ahead of myself in saying that. Today, we will take a very close look at the organization, the Legionaries of Christ and Regnum Christi, its infamous founder, the conditions and environment which permitted and protected his crimes and indiscretions, and the shenanigans that the organization continues to be embroiled in after its founder's passing. Welcome to the Deep Dive Project.
I am appalled at the myth. The myth is that Father Maciel is a holy person.
I wanted to ask you a question about Father Maciel.
Can you talk about? I'm not so informed.
For years, despite repeated allegations that Father Maciel had sexually abused young men, Pope John Paul II continued to call him an important leader of Catholic youth.
There was a cult of personality.
For us, there is an accusation against Maciel, against the Legion of Christ, against John Paul II.
Father Maciel was the greatest fundraiser of the modern church. With only 500 priests, the Legionaries had a budget of $650 million. Pope John Paul had said the priesthood held no room for men who abused the young. Yet for years he celebrated Father Maciel, the founder of a religious order, the Legion of Christ.
The order at one point said Father Maciel is in heaven. Do you believe that?
Clergy sexual abuse of minors and vulnerable adults has occurred from the earliest centuries. It has been known to church authorities and is a predictable but highly unfortunate feature of clerical life. It has been denied and hidden by bishops and popes who have consistently acted in a conspiratorial manner to prevent instances of abuse from becoming publicly known, especially to law enforcement authorities.
Was this movement of teachers rejuvenating the church, as John Paul believed? Or was it, as critics claimed, more like a cult on a galloping hunt for money?
Before we begin, this is just a quick reminder that this is a totally independent venture, so your support and feedback are greatly appreciated. I got the heads up after my last upload that there was something funky going on with the audio. That should be corrected in this video, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. If you enjoy this video or find it transformational or educational in any way, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. That helps my channel out tremendously. Additionally, because of the fact that the issues that I discuss here are not monetization friendly from YouTube's perspective, if you would like to support my work monetarily, you can buy me a coffee for $5, and the link for that is in the description of this video. You do not have to, so please do not feel like this is any pressure. Simply watching my videos and sharing your thoughts helps so much. But for those of you who have helped my caffeine-fueled endeavor here, thank you so much for the support. It means a lot. Because of those buy me a coffee donations, I'm going to be able to upgrade my mic situation, which I am really excited about. I've been using this lav mic for quite some time now, and it's okay, but it's not great. And I am invested in continuing to improve the quality of the content that I am delivering here, and this is all going to help with that in the long run. So thank you. Thank you so much. That being said, let's get into the topic of conversation today. Before we dig into the founder of the Legionaries of Christ, I wanted to give a quick overview of what the Legionaries of Christ and Regnum Christi are for those who may be unfamiliar. I have done my best to make sure that I am pronouncing the names of the people and the places here correctly, but I apologize in advance if I don't nail it every single time. I am, after all, just an American heathen, and although I am currently trying to learn Spanish, English is the only language that I am fully fluent in, and sometimes those proper nouns just escape me. So thank you in advance for the grace and understanding. So, what is the Legionaries of Christ? The Congregation of the Legionaries of Christ, also referred to as the Legion of Christ or just the Legion, is a congregation of papal right composed of priests, deacons, and brothers in formation for the priesthood. It was founded on January 3rd, 1941. According to their own website, they are, quote, driven by the desire of Jesus' heart to set the world ablaze. The religious priests of the Legionaries of Christ support each other and work in communion with other Regnum Christi members in their mission to form apostles, people who let the love of Christ the King transform their hearts, their families, and the world. The Legionaries of Christ are a Roman Catholic religious congregation of priests and seminarians and part of the Regnum Christi Federation. They live in communities and make vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. According to their site, quote, the formation of a legionary is a deep and transformative process that spans an average of 14 years, leading up to his priestly ordination. He is formed to be both contemplative and apostolic. Legionaries go out as missionaries in today's world. With great charity, joy, and zeal, they invite people into the adventure of living for Christ and transforming the culture around them. Each year, they impact thousands of lives through youth work, education, parishes, missions, the sacraments, and spiritual direction. In the past, it was described as a conservative religious institute whose ability to attract large numbers of young Catholics to religious vocations and large financial donations made it a favorite of the Vatican, and one whose focus has traditionally been on evangelizing society's leaders, the wealthy and powerful, in hopes that it would gain momentum as a beneficial impact on society. Who does that remind you of? The organization began in Mexico, where its largest base remains. Houses of formation were established in Spain and Italy within its first decade, with chapters expanding into Ireland, the United States, France, and Central Europe over the ensuing decades. Legionaries have been described as easy to spot due to their militaristic haircuts, dress, and behavior. Legion culture has been described as insular and cult-like. The order is engaged in a number of apostolates, including education, pastoral guidance, catechesis, evangelization and mission work, works of charity and mercy, and spiritual attention to Regnum Christi members. In 2021, 3 of the order's 4 U.S. schools were named in the list of top 50 Catholic high schools developed by the Cardinal Newman Society, which essentially means that the society gave these schools its stamp of approval. The Cardinal Newman Society maintains a list of approved schools and universities. Just as a side note, I have toyed with the idea of going through that list and looking at the connections that these universities have to organizations like Opus Dei and Regnum Christi and other movers and shakers in our society and political sphere. So if that is something that you would be interested in seeing, let me know and I might do that. The Regnum Christi Federation, or just Regnum Christi, was founded on January 3rd, 1959. According to their website, it is, quote, a spiritual family with 4 vocations and 1 mission: to make Christ's kingdom present in today's world. It is composed of lay Catholics, regular folks, as well as the religious congregation of the Legionaries of Christ, the Societies of Apostolic Life of the Consecrated Women of Regnum Christi, and the lay consecrated men of Regnum Christi. In addition to these adult membership categories, Regnum Christi also has the Encounters, Convictions, Your Decisions category, or ECYD, which is the Regnum Christi charism lived by children. According to the Regnum Christi Wikipedia page, ECYD formation is, quote, intended to bring children to know, accept, and master themselves through discovering in Christ the full meaning of their lives. ECYD children receive the same type of accompaniment as full-fledged, card-carrying Regnum Christi adults. And from my perspective, it seems like something like that could very easily be abused, but we will get into that later on in this episode. Their motto is, Christ our King, thy kingdom come. The Society of Apostolic Life Consecrated Women of Regnum Christi is an international society of pontifical right, approved by the Holy See and part of the Regnum Christi Federation. Called to a profound intimacy with Christ and impelled by his love, we respond with an exclusive and total dedication to him through the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience lived in multicultural communities. Interested women enter into what is known as personal accompaniment. After that, they attend a summer discernment course, and if at the conclusion of that they decide that they are still interested in becoming a consecrated woman, they move on to the candidacy stage and take the first round of temporary vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Those vows last for 3 years and are then repeated once more, and then the women move on to studying academics and seeking experiences living in apostolic community. After the last 3 years are up, with the intention that a woman would have matured and could fully discern whether or not she wanted to continue, she could ask to make her final vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in the Society of Apostolic Life of the Consecrated Women of Regnum Christi. It seems like this is a very lengthy discernment process and that it would work pretty well for helping someone discern whether or not they have a sincere and authentic vocation. And it's certainly much more than what we have seen from another organization who targets young people for recruitment. Allegedly. The lay consecrated men of Regnum Christi profess the same mission as the consecrated women of Regnum Christi, which they say is to make present Christ's kingdom in the hearts of people and in society. They aim to accomplish this with a 5-pronged approach, which includes prophetic testimony, evangelization of temporal realities, availability, charity, professional competence and joy, and promotion of fraternal communion and prayer, work, and offering. The commitment process appears to follow the exact same path as the consecrated women. So, with that background information in mind, let's get into these organizations' founder. Let's talk about Marcial Maciel. Marcial Maciel Degollado was born on March 10th, 1920 in Cotilla, Michoacan, Mexico, the youngest boy of 9 children in a family with strong connections to the Mexican Catholic Church. This meant that many of Maciel's relatives were priests, and 4 of his uncles were bishops. He had a troubled youth riddled with physical abuse at the hands of his older brothers and verbal abuse from his father. He was sent to work in the sugar fields to toughen up. Many years later, he would tell one of his victims that the mule drivers had sexually abused him. While none of this excuses his future behavior, I do have a lot of sympathy and compassion for children who are forced to grow up in abusive, dysfunctional, and harmful environments. It makes me wonder who Maciel might have become if he had been raised raised in a nurturing, caring environment and had been protected rather than exploited. While not all children who are abused will grow up to become abusers themselves, the research does show that there is a correlation there, and it just makes me wonder. Maciel was expelled from 2 seminaries for unclear reasons. He was ordained to the priesthood only after one of his bishop uncles ordained him after private studies in November 26, 1944. It's almost like he should never have been a priest. It must have been quite the ordeal, though, as the ceremony was filmed and the footage was used as propaganda for marketing years later. If I can find any of that, I will insert it here.
It is part of a decree signed by Father Alvaro Corquera, Director General of the Legionaries of Christ. Significant dates in the life of Maciel, such as his birth or baptism, will not be observed, although the day of his death on January 30th will be devoted to prayer. The decree also states that members of the congregation can retain, in private, a photograph of Maciel, and his writings may be used in sermons.
In 1941, Maciel founded his religious order, the Legionaries of Christ, with the support of Francisco Arias, the Bishop of Cuernavaca. He went on to found the lay arm, Regnum Christi, in 1959. His main stated purpose in doing so was to form and motivate enterprising lay members of the Catholic Church to take an active role in the Church's mission on earth. A particular focus of this mission was on the members of Regnum Christi and their spiritual formation. Members were compelled to take private vows, never speak ill of Maciel or any superior, and to report anyone who did, which earned them the accusation of being a cult of personality. This behavior became so well known that the order was accused of imposing a 4th vow in addition to the traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, which demanded, quote, unconditional and uncomplaining acceptance of what Maciel said by pushing away and casting doubt upon all those who questioned his behavior, making him unassailable. One interesting tidbit is that members of Regnum Christi would study Maciel's letters as part of their spiritual formation, which reminds me of another religious organization that we have talked about, which also likes to have its members read the material that was created by its founder. I just think that's interesting. Maciel was a known supporter and fan of totalitarian leaders like Franco and Hitler, admiring the absolute obedience that these leaders' followers had for them.
Maciel wanted to fascinate, just as he himself was fascinated by leaders. When he spoke about Hitler or General Franco, it was with admiration. He was from a background that worshipped the supreme leader, the one who led the others. He admired leaders, and he was clearly influenced by figures such as Franco or Hitler.
They demanded from us the spirit of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, and held up as an example the Hitler Youth, who gave themselves entirely to their leader.
In the years before his exposure as a predator, he had a good reputation in the Vatican and was active in organizations such as the Interdicastrial Commission for a Just Distribution of Clergy, the 4th General Conference of Latin American Bishops, and the Ordinary Assembly of the Synod of Bishops on the Consecrated Life and its Role in the Church and the World, which is a hell of a title. He was also a familiar of John Paul II, with the then Pope allegedly admiring Maciel for his strict adherence to the magisterium and his ability to gain vocations to the Legion of Christ. It is also worth noting that the Legion gave the Vatican quite a bit of money over the years, so the relationship there was clearly mutually beneficial. An article published in The Independent stated that, quote, senior figures in the church who were often the recipients of the Legion's financial largesse rejoiced in his genius for fundraising and fortune building. Maciel was also connected to high-profile individuals in Mexico and the United States, including former Mexican President Miguel Alemán, uber-wealthy Carlos Slim, who owns a sizable stake in the New York Times, the Garza Sada billionaire family, Spanish singer and celebrity Placido Domingo, and American actor Mel Gibson, as well as political figures such as Jeb Bush, Rick Santorum, and Thomas Monaghan of Domino's Pizza, who went on to found Ave Maria University in the town where it resides, Ave Maria, Florida. And I feel like he is just starting to pop up repeatedly now in all of these videos like a bad penny. I may need to look into him a little bit at some point. But then, in 1976, the Vatican received a dossier from Bishop John Raymond McGann, which included a 12-page, single-spaced letter addressed to Maciel. In it, Juan Vaca, a former seminarian student of Maciel, stated the priest molested him from the age of 12 to 24, with an alleged 20 other victims. The dossier went ignored by the Vatican. In 1989, Vaca attempted to break some kind of ground with the Vatican once more, sending another long, detailed letter. This time, the Vatican responded, but on the subject of repercussions for Maciel, they were silent. On February 23, 1997, a report in the Hartford Courant exposed Maciel as a virulent, abusive predator of 9 self-proclaimed victims of Maciel's proclivities. The victims alleged they had been abused as youths and young men by Maciel while studying under him in Spain and Rome in the 1940s and the 1950s. This group included respectable academics and former priests who went on to lodge formal charges with the Vatican. A commentary piece written by Steve Skojak gives fascinating insight into what life was like for Legion members during this time, and tellingly what the Legion's response to the scandal was. Quote, in early December of 1996, just weeks before I made my decision to leave, every full-time member of the apostolate in the United States was flown to the Legionary HQ in Cheshire, Connecticut on short notice and at what must have been phenomenal expense in the hopes that the crisis could be averted. We had just returned from Cheshire, where we had been for Thanksgiving, and we were told to pack our bags for a flight in the morning. No further explanation given. The briefings on the matter at hand, the expected forthcoming revelations of sex abuse accusations against Father Maciel in the Hartford Courant appeared to have been segregated on need-to-know levels. The priests got one briefing, seminarians and houses of apostolate got another, and so on down the line. When it came to the classroom full of co-workers sitting there wondering why we had been dragged there to wait for some unknown purpose, we were ultimately told very little at all. Quote, some accusations are coming out in the media against Father Maciel. They are not true. Don't even read them. If anyone asks, tell them they are false. End quote. Shockingly, they were told the following year that the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith would not be moving towards a prosecution. In retaliation, the Legion set up a website accusing the 9 victims of fomenting a conspiracy against Maciel. People flocked to defend him, including William Donahue of the Catholic League, who said the men's claims were balderdash, and Father Richard John Newhouse of First Things magazine, who stated that the charges were false with a, quote, moral certainty. John Paul II continued to sing praises of Maciel, calling him an efficacious guide to youth and applauding his gift for attracting young men to the depleted ranks of the priesthood. In 2005, shortly after JP2 passed, Ratzinger reopened the investigation, and the Vatican requested that Maciel withdraw from active ministry. Perhaps, now that Maciel's gatekeeper had passed away, Ratzinger was able to act unilaterally and address the situation properly. Maciel stepped down the following year. In May 2006, Ratzinger, now Pope, disciplined Maciel, ordering him to live, quote, a reserved life of penitence and prayer, relinquishing any form of public ministry, end quote, and a press communique was published to that effect. However, it is interesting to note that a 2006 article published in El País revealed that Rome had investigated Maciel for suspected pedophilia between 1956 and 1959. Keep that in mind because it will come up again. While Maciel was suspended from his position as Superior General of the Legion and expelled from Rome, the investigation netted no results, and Maciel soon resumed business as usual, but this time with more power. The situation continues to haunt the Vatican even to this day, with a recent AP article discussing the details of the newly opened archives from Pius XII, which further illustrate the lengths some went to in order to protect Maciel, and more importantly, the money and young men he was ushering into the Catholic Church via his religious order. AP notes that, quote, all versions of the October 1st, 1956 memo make it clear that Maciel had a great protector in the Vatican in the form of Cardinal Giuseppe Pizzardo, the number 2 in the powerful Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. Other documents say the Congregation for Religious, quote, couldn't proceed further against Father Maciel because of recommendations and interventions by high-ranking personalities, end quote. A formal trial was never held, and Maciel was never defrocked. Maciel moved to a house that he shared with other priests in Jacksonville, Florida, where he died on January 30th, 2008, at the age of 87. In February 2009, news broke that Maciel had led a double life. The Legion publicly acknowledged that Maciel had fathered a daughter. The general director of the Legion went around to each of the legionary territories and publicly apologized for Maciel's behavior. Because of this, Pope Benedict XVI personally intervened and initiated a formal Vatican visitation of all legionary houses. Later that same year, a Spanish daily published an interview with a woman who had had a child with Maciel in 1986 and was living in a luxury apartment in Madrid, which Maciel had purchased for her. A day later, Mexican media reported that attorney Jose Bonilla would represent 3 of a possible total of 6 of Maciel's natural children in a civil lawsuit to recover Maciel's estate. It was alleged that Maciel owned several properties in Mexico and around the world in his own name. According to Jose Bonilla, whose son was attacked by a teacher at one of Maciel's schools, Maciel took an adoptive son and natural son, Omar and Raul, on trips to Europe using an alias of Raul Rivas. Of course, they were also victims of Maciel's disgusting pedophilia. Additionally, it became known that Maciel had had at least one other child with another woman. Norma Hilda Baños was 26 years old when she gave birth to Maciel's daughter in 1987. On March 4th, 2010, the Catholic News Agency published a story titled, quote, "Legion of Christ Responds to Founder's Alleged Children." And it's kind of insane. The response came following an interview that was broadcast live in Mexico and then later in Spain, in which Maciel's mistress, former domestic worker Laura Gutierrez, and her 3 sons, Omar, Jose, and Christian, gave detailed accounts of their relationship with the late founder of the Legionaries. Laura stated that her relationship with Maciel began in 1972 when he was 56 and she was just 19 years old. A gross detail I have been unable to forget since I read it. It would seem to me that Maciel preyed on a variety of vulnerable personality types, really anyone who could stroke his clearly engorged ego and satisfy his sexual cravings were fair game. Laura stated that Maciel had told her that his name was Raul Rivas and that he was a CIA agent and security man for oil companies. Delusions of grandeur. Following that interview, the Legion of Christ in Mexico released 2 statements. In the first, the organization expressed its shared suffering and pain with the members of the Gonzalez Lara family. In the second, it was revealed that Maciel's son Raul had requested $26 million from the Legion in exchange for his silence. In response, the Legion publicized a letter in which Father Carlos Skirchley, Legion of Christ, wrote to Raul stating that, "In no way can we accede to your request for money in exchange for silence. We prefer to seek and face the truth, no matter how painful it may be." Maybe they just didn't want to have to fork over $26 million, but that's just my opinion. In the second statement, another Legion of Christ priest, Father Jesus Quiros Andres, rector of Anahuac University, alleged that, in essence, Raul had attempted to leverage the scandalous nature of his relationship with Maciel as his son for financial gain, claiming that in the recorded phone calls, Raul stated that he felt entitled to a legacy of $6 million for him, his younger brother, and his mother. Father Andres stated that, "I was ignorant of the fact that our conversations had been recorded by Raul. It surprises and offends me, especially since Raul himself had asked for complete reserve and discretion regarding this topic." Raul went on to sue the Legionaries in the U.S. for their complicity in allowing Maciel to maintain an incestuous relationship with him for many years. The entire affair strikes me as very messy and like just a convoluted he said. As far as what actually happened, how these conversations were carried out, and precisely what precipitated them, we may never know, but the entire situation paints a very ugly picture of all of the people connected to Maciel, in my opinion. Nobody is coming out of this thing smelling like roses. Pope Benedict XVI ordered an apostolic visitation of the Legionaries of Christ, sending 5 bishops from 5 different countries working independently to each other to conduct an extensive investigation, which took them to nearly every one of the religious orders' houses. The official report was published on March 15, 2010, and submitted to the Vatican. The following week, the Legion of Christ and Regnum Christi issued a joint statement acknowledging Maciel's history of abuse and apologized. The Vatican announced that the Pope would name a delegate to the Legion and a visitator to Regnum Christi because, quote, "The conduct of Maciel has given rise to serious consequences in the life and structure of the Legion, such as to require a process of profound re-evaluation." The Vatican also denounced Maciel for having created a system of power that enabled him to lead an immoral double life, devoid of scruples and authentic religious meaning. The Vatican also held the Legion's feet to the fire by stating that it had created a mechanism of defense around Maciel to shield him from accusations and suppress damaging witnesses from reporting abuse, stating that it made him untouchable. It decried the lamentable disgracing and expulsion of those who doubted Maciel's virtue and acknowledged the hardships of Maciel's accusers through the years when they were ostracized and ridiculed, commending their courage and perseverance to demand the truth. So I think the Vatican Vatican was just hoping that no one would ever find out that there were Vatican higher-ups who were also helping the Legion out to protect Maciel and his reputation. That didn't really work out for them, but yeah. It would seem that only after the man's death was the organization or the Vatican prepared to step up and at least pretend to do the right thing. Did the network of protection that surrounded Maciel during his life die with him? I'm not sure. During my research, I found a document that was published in December of 2013 titled Code of Conduct and Other Directives Pertaining to Safe Environment Issues in North America for the Legionaries of Christ. It is 27 pages and broken down into 4 sections, plus an introduction and an appendix. It speaks to the general conduct legionaries should exhibit in their ministry and apostolate, including interactions with minors and educational institutions. On the subject of reporting obligations, the document states that the institution will require its members to report to civil authorities known or suspected sexual abuse of a victim who is currently a minor, regardless of the state's mandatory reporting laws. I will leave this document linked down below for anyone who would be interested in taking a look at it. It seems comprehensive and appropriate, and I would be interested in hearing from anyone who has had direct experience with this type of directive or one similar to it, because I know that since the early aughts, the Catholic Church has begun rolling out directives like this in an effort to protect people and establish safeguarding protocols for minors and at-risk individuals and so on. I suppose the jury is still out on whether these protocols are sufficient or comprehensive enough. I've heard differing reports from various people, but again, I would like to hear from all of you if you have any thoughts regarding this issue and regarding these protocols. Despite claims to the contrary, it is interesting to note that the order appears to continue to hold some type of reverence for Maciel as the founder of the organization, judging from the tone of Skojec's commentary published January 2019. In an article titled 13 Years After Maciel Crimes Revealed, Legionaries of Christ Still Celebrating His Legacy, Skojec notes that as Catholics the world over were forced to come to grips with the fact that since 1941, according to a Vatican report, the Vatican knew and did nothing about Maciel's horrifying predation, the Legionaries carried on with their celebratory commemoration of the organization's founding by, quote, 13 boys and a young seminarian, a turn of phrase that honestly fails to land in light of Maciel's disgusting pedophilic behavior. That same report sought to lay blame for the cover-up on a mafia, stating that they, quote, were not the church. And it would seem to me that this is just another example of the no true Scotsman's fallacy, which the Roman Catholic Church has continuously relied on practically since its inception under Emperor Constantine in order to deflect blame and avoid any type of meaningful accountability or reform. That's just my opinion, but that's certainly how it seems to me. Additionally, the report attempts to lay all of the blame for the cover-up on an institutional and cultish reverence for the Legion's superiors that he, Maciel, had fostered. So, which was it? A mafia of bad faith actors or a cult of personality created by Maciel himself? Given the fact that there is documentary evidence indicating that individuals in positions of authority within the Vatican, presumably, perhaps, allegedly, even John Paul II himself, were alerted of Maciel's crimes on more than one occasion over the span of more than 50 years, the entire thing feels more like a case of willful blind ignorance than a clandestine coup to maintain one man's position of power in the church. And while this is just my opinion, the reason why I feel that way is because of the Catholic Church's nearly 2,000-year trend of downplaying, ignoring, and mishandling sex crimes and sexual deviancy, which is a matter of historical fact. If you are interested in learning more about that history, I highly recommend the book Sex, Priests, and Secret Codes, the Catholic Church's 2,000-year paper trail of sexual abuse, which I will be referencing again later on in this episode. At this point, at least some clergy seem prepared to deal with the situation head-on rather than continuing to downplay and detract from how bad things had gotten. In a 2019 interview, Cardinal Braz de Aviz stressed the importance of an immediate Vatican response, noting that, "I have the impression that allegations of abuse will grow. We are only at the beginning. We've been covering up for 70 years, and this has been a huge mistake. It is heartening to hear people from within the church acknowledging the fact that this was an incredibly messed up situation that should never have happened and should not have been allowed to persist as long as it did. Unfortunately, though, for the Legionaries of Christ, this was not the only scandal that they would have to endure. At this point in the episode, I'm going to switch gears and we're going to divert our attention from Martial Maciel's history, which I pretty much went through in its entirety, and talk about some of the other problematic individuals and situations that have occurred within the Legionaries of Christ. The first individual that we're going to look at was a man named Thomas Williams, known for his work as a TV commentator and popular spiritual writer and speaker. He issued a statement on May 12, 2012, confirming that he had fathered a child and would be taking a year off from public ministry to reflect on my commitments as a priest. Williams was a Michigan State native and had been ordained legionary priest in 1994, and he went on to become one of the best-known American members of the Legion of Christ due to his media and public speaking exposure. He had served as a religious affairs analyst for NBC, CBS, and Sky News, and had published 14 books on Catholic spirituality and doctrine. He also acted as a publisher of an order-sponsored web-based news agency called Zenit for 10 years. He's high profile, well-known, and ostensibly well-respected too. But Williams was forced to come clean after a report of his affair reached the Vatican via a group known as the Association of Aid for Victims of the Legion of Christ. In an article written by John L. Allen on NCR, it was reported that that same report also asserted that Williams has had sexual relations with students at the Legion's University in Rome, Regina Apostolorum, where he had served as faculty, and that, quote, Williams had a sexual relationship with the daughter of a prominent American Catholic personality, end quote. Williams refused to comment on specifics, stating simply that, I am truly sorry for everyone who is hurt by this revelation, which is the epitome of a non-apology if I have ever heard one. As a result of this information coming to light, Father Luis Garza, the top official for the Legionaries in the U.S., sent a nationwide letter to members which stated that Williams would undergo a period of reflection, prayer, and atonement. Another interesting aspect of this situation is the fact that because Williams' indiscretions did not involve a minor or accusations of abuse, he was not subject to the Vatican's anti-abuse procedures. And in my opinion, this shows a gross lack of understanding on the Vatican and the Legionaries' part, because Williams was essentially a celebrity. He was a well-known public figure who was ostensibly well-respected and liked. And just because the people he went after weren't children doesn't mean that there wasn't a power imbalance at play, particularly in regard to the alleged relationships he engaged in with seminarians at the university where he had been a faculty member. The Cape Cod Times noted that, until he left active ministry, Williams was the most publicly prominent priest in the 900-strong order. Additionally, the news about Williams followed on the heels of confirmation from the religious order that at least 7 other priests belonging to the Legionaries were being investigated for alleged sexual abuse of minors that dates back decades. Now, in the beginning, Williams stated that he would not reveal the name of the woman that he had fathered a child with, citing respect for the privacy of the woman and her child. But a year later, the Cape Cod Times wrote a piece detailing his wedding plans, so that clearly didn't last long. It was revealed that the woman he was marrying was Elizabeth Lev, the daughter of former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Mary Ann Glendon. It was also revealed that Williams' superior had known about Williams' child and affair since 2005, but had allowed Williams to keep teaching and preaching morality. What? That same article also states that Lev had initially denied an intimate relationship with Williams, which gives the entire thing an odd flavor, and again brings me back to my observation that Williams was in a position of power because of his celebrity. Who could deny him? Williams and Lev's origin story is bizarre, if what I found is to be believed, which we're going to take it with a healthy grain of salt. But it's also interesting to note that, according to an article which we will discuss in a moment, Williams shared a home with Maciel in the 90s for nearly a decade. While I was looking for more information on the Williams scandal, I came across Regain, or Religious Groups Awareness International Network, which monitors harmful groups in mainstream churches and religious groups. It was founded by ex-legionaries who are critical of the Legion and its founder. I have linked the Regain site down below in the source document, so if you would like to look through it, feel free. There's a lot of really interesting things on there about the Legionaries of Christ and about Opus Dei and other organizations as well. As an interesting aside, I discovered that the organization was actually sued by the Legion in August of 2007. The lawsuit alleges that written property of the Legion, including letters written by Maciel and copies of unpublished principles and norms intended only for dissemination and use by Legion members, were stolen and posted online and out of context as part of a concerted effort to wage a malicious disinformation campaign against the Legion. The Legion pleaded that the value of the alleged stolen property was worth at least $750,000. The president of Regain has asserted that, to the best of his knowledge, nothing was obtained improperly, and expressed the opinion that the lawsuit request for information on anonymous message board posters was an action proving that the Legion is a cult which controls information, stifles freedom of expression, and goes after dissenters. I couldn't find any information on what the ultimate decision in this case was, if the Legion won or lost, or if Regain was obligated to pay any fines. What I did find was a veritable rabbit hole of lawsuits that have been filed against the Legion over the last 15 years or so, but we will get into that in a moment. This case between Regain and the Legionaries of Christ reminded me of a similar lawsuit which was carried out in Madrid, Spain between Opus Dei and the website Opus Libris, because of the fact that Opus Libris published internal documents on the website. Opus Dei had traditionally vehemently denied the existence of these documents, but in suing Opus Libris proved that the documents did in fact exist. Opus Libris was ordered to remove the documents from his site, and that was that. If you would like to learn more about that, check out episode 13 of the Deep Dive Project, which I have linked if you're watching this on YouTube. One article I found on Regain titled "The Crimes of Uncle Ted and Father Thomas Williams, Legionary of Christ," discusses the state of pedophilia and sexual deviancy within the Catholic Church and the Legionaries in particular. This is where we're getting into the whole bit about taking things with a grain of salt. It was written by Anne Barnhart and originally featured on her blog. The article begins with a condemnation of the bishops and clerics who, for decades, knew of the pederasty occurring within its ranks, and rather than reporting and condemning the individuals at fault, chose to harbor them and outright deny that there was even an issue to begin with. I think that this perspective has been more or less totally validated by the overarching body of research and media pertaining directly to the Catholic Church's sex abuse crisis. But in regard to the Legionaries of Christ in particular, Barnhart refers to Williams as, quote, the pretty boy face of the truly evil racketeering organization, the Legion of Christ, end quote. She is also the source which alleged that Williams shared a home with Maciel for a decade during the 1990s. And the version of events Barnhart recounts in regard to Williams' relationship with Lev, which is a matter of fact, is pretty wild. The claims she makes, which could be easily fact-checked, line up with the research that I've done, but some of the insights that she seems to have into personal details regarding the individuals involved are much more difficult to parse. I'm going to read through what she says, but I'd like everyone to maintain a healthy degree of skepticism, since it is impossible to know how accurate this story is and where it originated from, since Barnhart does not bother to cite any sources. She writes, Father Williams, flying high as the number 3 of the $30 billion Legion of Christ criminal racketeering organization, was recruited by neo-Catholic darling and John Paul II advisor Mary Ann Glendon to recruit Glendon's Machiavellian apostate daughter Elizabeth Lev into the Legion. Glendon and Williams were both teaching at the Legion's University in Rome. Williams, it should be noted, was no less than the dean of the Department of Moral Theology. Glendon's daughter, Lev, was a hyper-promiscuous art student major who had just relocated to Rome. Glendon knew that her notoriously sexually aggressive and amoral daughter would, despite her apostasy, be more than happy to enter spiritual direction with Father Williams with an eye towards a sexual affair with this sexy priest. That is literally how the rest of the blog reads. It is just written very energetically, shall we say. Essentially, the story from Barnhart's perspective is that Lev baby-trapped Williams, leveraging her womb into a multi-million-dollar blackmail/child support package. Lev has the child, who was born with severe mental handicaps, and allegedly abandons the boy to the care of a friend. I won't even dwell on the things that Barnhart has to say about Lev's friend, because they flirt heavily with homophobia, and that's just not the tone that I want for my video. But it is Barnhart's opinion that the same environment which made Maciel's crimes possible also aided and abetted Williams and his familiars. So Are these details a matter of fact or the product of speculation? I truly have no idea. I have linked Regain in the source document, so feel free to take a look around and draw your own conclusions. But I wanted to share that little snippet of Barnhart's article just because I think it's really, really interesting and just kind of wild. So moving on from Williams, the next individual that we are going to talk about is a man named William Izquierdo. In December of 2013, the National Catholic Register published an article with the headline, "Legion of Christ Acknowledges Abuse Committed at Connecticut Seminary." The territorial director of the Legion in North America, Father Luis Garza, released a statement in which it was revealed that the results of an independent investigation conducted by a third party uncovered, quote, "significant evidence of sexual abuse," end quote. By 2008, Izquierdo had ceased exercising his ministry due to rapidly declining health and onset dementia. He was living out the last of his sorry days in a facility receiving care. The article also notes that, quote, "a total of 35 legionary priests have been accused of sexual abuse of minors throughout the congregation's history," the Legion has revealed, although Father Clarion told the Register he expected more to emerge in the future. Of these 35, 9 have been found guilty, including the founder, and punished canonically. 2 were laicized, 7 had sanctions imposed on their life and ministry. 14 have been acquitted, 10 priests were found innocent after an investigation was made, according to Canon 1717 of the Code of Canon Law, and the other 4 cases involved imprudent behavior, but not crimes that would require sanctions. And 2 had already left the ministry when the allegations were presented, and therefore no canonical procedure was initiated against them. 10 other cases are still under review. Of 6 accused Legionary of Christ superiors and formators, 3 have been found guilty of sexually abusing adults under their authority, one of whom includes Maciel. The other 3 have been acquitted. 2 cases were judged to have been imprudent behavior that did not warrant restrictions on ministry, end quote. After that, we have Oscar Turian. On October 7th, 2017, Reuters published a story from Vatican City in which it outlined the Legionaries' most recent fall into disgrace. Father Oscar Turian was the rector of the Pontifical International College Maria Mater Ecclesiae, a seminary for men in the Legionary Order studying for the priesthood. Turian revealed to his superiors that his mistress had given birth to a daughter, and that he had previously had a son with the same woman several years ago. He blamed his secrecy on weakness and shame, stating that he had lost his grounding when news of Maciel's behavior rocked the order and the Catholic Church at large between 2006 and 2014. He alleged that he had not misappropriated any of the seminary's funds, instead supporting his secret family with donations from friends. So I have a few thoughts. First of all, do we really think truly that he was supporting his secret family with donations from friends? What friends? And it said that he lost his grounding when the revelations about Maciel became public starting in 2006. But one has to wonder if maybe he just didn't see it as licensed to do whatever he wanted, thinking that the Vatican and the Legionaries of Christ would protect him as they protected Maciel for so many years. After him, we have Fernando Martinez Suarez. Between 2019 and 2020, the Congregation of the Legionaries of Christ withdrew Suarez's clerical status due to an investigation conducted by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which found him guilty of sexually abusing at least 8 little girls between the ages of 6 and 11 from 1991 to 1993, although the organization only recognized 6 of the cases while he was working in the Cumbres Lomas Institute in Mexico City and Cancun. They stated that the Legionaries of Christ will assume the responsibility that Fernando Martinez leads a life that corresponds to his status as a religious who has lost the clerical state, and reaffirm their determination to walk the difficult and demanding path of reparation and healing. As it turns out, Suarez, like Maciel, had a history of allegations that had followed him for more than 50 years. The first accusation had to be released dated from 1969, and while the religious order released statements indicating that it had every intention of swift and immediate action in this case, one of Suarez's victims takes a dim view of their PR. Ana Lucia Salazar, one of the reporting victims, stated that they tried to make up the structural system to bury the truth, thinking that people do not understand and think that it is a lonely pedophile, when in fact they are welcomed and supported by the institution, end quote. Ana has accused the order of encouraging a structural complicity. This stems from the fact that when she was abused abused at only 8 years old, her parents went to the school authorities and were told not to report the incident because it would get Anna, not the institution or the order, in trouble. She also pointed out the irony in the fact that only upon making her testimony public did the Legion decide to start an investigation. At that time, she had become aware of the fact that Suarez had been transferred to Salamanca and was in contact once again with minors in a novitiate. It is an attitude on the part of the institution of reintegrating their pedophiles over and over and putting them to feast on children. There is a structural complicity on the part of the institution." End quote. An even more sickening and insidious twist, an activist and former member of the Advisory Council of the National Commission on Human Rights, Alberto Athi, pointed out that, according to a published letter, Suarez had been one of Maciel's many abuse victims, which indicates just how long-lasting and damaging Maciel's legacy of abuse really is. Athi indicated not only the legionaries and the Vatican, but also the Mexican authorities, quote, "because complicity is not only within the Legion, but within the competent Mexican authorities that have never opened an investigation in the matter. We were never called to present information. We were never asked to add anything about it." End quote. From start to finish, there is, once again, a clear pathology of protecting the predator, laying the blame on the victims, and denying the truth. One would think, after the embarrassing spectacle that Maciel created and the legionaries' expressed desire to, quote-unquote, face the truth, in their words, and deal with the consequences, they have not learned from the past or changed their behavior, preferring instead to, once again, fall back on the same modus operandi that the Church as a whole has favored for 2,000 years. In 2020, the Legionaries of Christ once again committed to the objective recognition of abuse that can facilitate the path of healing by publishing data from 27 different priests who had sexually abused 170 minors, the majority of them males between the ages of 11 and 16, as part of a renewal process they claim was initiated as a result of the scandal of Maciel. This is weird to me because at this point, Maciel is just patient zero. There are a host of other problematic individuals, to say nothing of the institutionalized attitude of denial and suppression that has so clearly been implemented before, during, and after Maciel's life and death. The report was titled Truth, Justice, and Healing, which, along with providing the data on the 27 offenders and their victims, also included steps taken to care and provide aid for the victims, as well as develop safe environments in the congregation. The cases occur throughout South America and the United States, and the legionary priests are identified either by first and last name or with a numerical code, with the intent that the information will be updated as new data is acquired. The order outlined planned steps for the coming year, stating that it will, quote, reinforce professional and systematic care and listening to victims, establish an independent program for the economic reparation of victims, and examine possible cases of cover-up and gross negligence. That all sounds very good, and perhaps at long last the order intended to start to actually follow through on what it had claimed it intended to do following Maciel's death in 2008. However, a 2024 blog post on the blog Veritas Liberabit Vas entitled Cover Up, Negligence, and Delay as a Form of Legionary Abuse makes a number of claims, not the least of which is that the 2020 report previously mentioned does not actually present any evidence of an investigation, did not mention any ecclesiastical authority, or refer to any external body that could independently verify the information in the report. Quote, acting in the dark is typical of those who do not walk in the light because their works are not good. End quote. The author of the blog takes a dim view of the Legion's alleged dedication to dealing with abuses and helping victims, observing what seems to them to be a drawn-out and protracted charade, stating that, quote, when you wait to make the truth about an event or about certain responsibilities, delaying resolutions, delaying procedures, and hiding investigations, are acts of re-victimization. In 4 years, they have not been known to classify a single case, not even the known cases. Liberabit Veritas points out that beyond the personal responsibility of Garza and his ilk, the congregation is institutionally guilty, and the delay in recognizing the truth, the concealment of reports, and the secrecy in the proceedings gives true testimony of institutional responsibility. The blog hosts a number of articles pertaining to different aspects of the Legionary scandal, and I have linked it down below. I wish that I could say that I felt confident in these various measures and protocols, and that could take the Legion and the Catholic Church as a whole at their word when they released statements expressing sorrow and a plan for reform and to enact changes. But unfortunately, they both have a horrible track record at this point. Have we seen the end of the sex abuse crisis? Time will tell, but I'm not holding my breath. In 2023, another victim of abuse came forward, claiming that between 2008 and 2010, she was the victim of serious abuses of conscience, power, sexuality, and even torture by priests, seminarians, and authorities of the Legionaries of Christ congregation who normally acted in a group and under the influence of drugs. The abuse took place while she was studying at the Cumbres Mujeres school. In 2005, she began to participate in the ECYD, the girls' club associated with the lay consecrated Apostolic Life Society of Regnum Christi for students between 10 and 16 years old. Through this club, she became interested in pursuing a vocation as a consecrated member of Regnum Christi. At 16, she left her parents' home and moved into the student center full-time. Shortly after that, she took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as a consecrated. Shortly following that, abuse at the hands of various members of the Legionaries of Christ and the consecrated began. She said, "On some occasions, an assistant took me to sectors of the house or other places where I was subjected to various group sexual and physical violations by priests and seminarians of the congregation, using different forms of forcing submission, such as taking drugs, threatening me, or leaving me without food so that I was weaker." In 2019, the unnamed victim filed a canonical complaint with the Abuse Prevention Department of the Chilean Episcopal Conference that resulted in two related but separate canonical processes. The first related to abuses committed by a consecrated member and a former consecrated member of Regnum Christi. The second related to abuses committed by priests of the Legion of Christ and was referred to the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith in Rome. Both cases were closed after only 2 years, citing a lack of credibility and contextual background information necessary to open a canonical trial against the aforementioned legionary priests. The victim has condemned this decision, pointing out that the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith has acted with deliberate blindness, avoiding seeing the overwhelming evidence that existed. In this way, I can affirm with certainty that the negligence of the defendant has been the sole and exclusive cause of the enormous and irreparable damage that I have suffered. The victim is still awaiting an acknowledgement of the harm she endured. So now that concludes my heartbreaking deep dive into the crimes that various members of the Legionaries of Christ and the Regnum Christi Federation have been accused of committing. I don't think that that deep dive was comprehensive, by the way. I do think that there are other victims, other perpetrators of abuse that are out there that either I just didn't notice when I was doing this research or who are continuing to fly under the radar, which is really, really concerning. But physical and sexual abuse allegations are not the only issues that the Legion of Christ has been accused of. I want to talk now about the aggressive recruitment that some people have accused the Legionaries of Christ of employing and the spiritual stagnation that seems to exist within this organization. And this, again, is another place where I think that the Legionaries of Christ have a lot in common with Opus Dei, and I think that that's really, really interesting. Right off of the bat, one of the notable similarities is that the Legion has been accused of targeting underage individuals for recruitment. Steve Skojek, once again, shared his experience with the religious order, stating that, quote, "I have a long history with them. They were a profoundly formative influence on me, and they almost cost me my faith. I am fortunate inasmuch as I was never a victim of the sexual abuse that finally brought down their founder, but he created a fiction, dressed up in a superficial veneer of Catholic orthodoxy that drew in countless good men and women wanting to live their faith in a difficult time in the church. It used up many of them and tossed them out, hurting and lost. It was essentially a spiritual bait and switch with loud papal approval, and it has damaged countless souls. I was one of them." Steve first came into contact with the Legionaries and Regnum Christi when he was 14 years old. He held various youth leadership positions and earned the dubious distinction of being the first young men's Regnum Christi team captain in the North American territory. He states that he was deeply invested, living in close community with legionary priests during his senior year of high school while attending the Highland School in Irving, Texas. He went on several mission trips, became a full-time member of the Regnum Christi co-worker program, and worked with youth in a Regnum Christi school near Atlanta, Georgia. During this period of his life, he states, quote, "I was being groomed for the priesthood. And the vocational pressure that I felt, I was told by more than one legionary priest that they knew I had a vocation, played havoc with a lifelong struggle I had with scruples and chronic anxiety, which was worsened by his Catholic upbringing and exposure to the legionaries of Christ." The issues within the order were many and glaring, but Steve brushed them off. He said, "It bothered me that they lied to people all the time and with such ease, even in very serious situations. They manipulated and used their recruits. They sought to sign up the wealthy and the powerful over and above the genuinely virtuous. They used events like mission trips, ostensibly to evangelize fallen away Catholics or non-Catholics, to lure in energetic young Catholics who would then be aggressively recruited by current members. A group of Regnum Christi men were told by the priest with us at one particular mission that if we weren't there to recruit people, there was, quote, something wrong with you." He goes on to describe the emotional, mental, and spiritual anguish he experienced as a result of his supposed vocation. He writes, "I was desperate. I was being made to believe I had a vocation even though I didn't want one. I was brainwashed into thinking that Maciel was some holy guru who could discern God's will with a clarity that could cut through all my anxiety and confusion. I thought he had some power to tell what only God could." Upon finally waking up to the false reality that he was living and the spiritual terrorism he was being exposed to, he attempted to make an amicable exit. Unfortunately, that wasn't in the order's MO. He details a truly bizarre situation that feels eerily similar to things we've heard described by former members of Opus Dei. He writes, quote, "It was a cult operation, and you were either all in or all out. They deployed Saul Alinsky's 13th rule against me so fast it made my head spin. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy. The legionaries contacted my friends around the country and other assignments. They contacted my acquaintances. They called my girlfriend's mother and sister. I had never even met her sister. They began telling everyone who knew me that I left because I wasn't generous and they should not get involved with what happened between Steve and the Legion. I was a member of a cult, and the cult subverted the good of the individual to the good of the enterprise, which existed to serve the cult leader. Even though I never had a conversation with Maciel, my entire life was dominated by the culture he created." Steve's entire article and account of his time in and recovery from the Legionaries of Christ is incredibly compelling and well written. I have left it linked in my source document, and I highly recommend that you read it. The Red Une site, which functions as a prevention network of sectarism and abuse, features articles pertaining to various sects, religious and otherwise. The site is in Spanish, and although I was able to translate everything, the translation is pretty dicey at certain points. I have edited some of the quotes that I took from the article we'll be discussing for clarity's sake. The article is titled, "Why Not End Life Here?" and it details an anonymous account of life within the legionary framework. It opens with an observation. I was less than 1 month from having left the Catholic sect of the Legionaries of Christ, to which I had belonged for 2 decades. My years of youth had vanished, enslaved body and soul, obeying in everything the guidelines of the sexually depraved Marcial Maciel and his henchmen, saying that he obeyed God himself. The article details an extremely strict and rigid environment in which novitiates were essentially brainwashed, forced to disconnect from family ties, ostensibly to avoid worldly temptations, and to identify solely with the organization as their new spiritual family. I'm doing air quotes. New spiritual family. Novitiates were only permitted to speak to loved ones 3 times a year and could only write to them every 15 days, although correspondence was always opened and read in order to ensure that it did not contain anything which might interfere with the recruits' new saintly way of thinking. The author notes how important it was for new recruits/novitiates to read sets of letters Maciel had allegedly written as part of their spiritual formation. These writings were elevated in importance above even the Bible. Additionally, recruits were not permitted to discuss doubts or struggles they might be having with anyone other than the superiors, who were seen as, quote, the voice of God. And if a recruit did decide to leave, they were removed quietly, without fuss or even a goodbye, the reasoning given that it was better this way, so as as not to cause scandal. So why would someone deciding that the order was not for them be a scandal? Surely people leave religious orders, monasteries, and convents all the time upon discerning that their vocation did not lie with the religious order in question. An organization or order that cannot grapple or contend with the fact that they may not be a fit for everyone is a gigantic red flag, in my opinion, and indicates a rigidity that is extremely concerning. The author also states that when you leave the Legion of Christ, you are abandoned to your fate. It should be noted that in countries where they operate, they do not pay Social Security for their members and do not enroll them in a retirement plan because in theory, they will take care of you. What they don't tell you is that when you leave the organization, you leave in an almost destitute state with no money and no legal rights accumulated during the time you were with them. Unfortunately, in many groups within the Catholic Church, there is this reality that the Vatican does not want to face for all of the money it would entail. So keep that financial aspect in the back of your mind because it will be coming back up again later. The article goes on to say that every aspiring legionary priest was expected to follow in Maciel's footsteps because he was elevated to a level of godlike importance within the order. Myths about his alleged holiness abounded, including fabrications such as he could read a person's mind and know what sins he had committed, or whether or not someone had a vocation, and that he could predict the future. And all of this flourished, even as accounts and reports of his criminal misconduct and pederasty continued to pile up at the Vatican. One has to wonder if that attitude is still alive and well within the Regnum Christi Federation and the Legions of Christ today. The author also alleges financial abuse, stating that, quote, "During my stay in the congregation, I did not receive money and I was not allowed to receive money. When that happened, it had to be delivered to the superiors because a religious must be poor, and that we were not allowed to follow the example of Maciel, who had large sums of money at will." The reasoning for this is clear. For the sect, there were two priorities that were money and finding new members. The vast majority of victims remained silent about everything that happened in there and the damage that we have suffered. First, because it is very difficult to understand what is happening to us, and second, because we cannot find an adequate channel for justice to be done to us. As much as there is talk within the Catholic Church of this group and other destructive sectarian groups within it, the Vatican turns a deaf ear when it comes to imparting justice and helping victims. I've linked that article as well, and it is well worth reading in its entirety. So remember how I mentioned that there is a financial aspect to all of this? Remember how I said that I found a rabbit hole full of lawsuits dating back quite a ways concerning the Legionaries of Christ? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. As if all of this garbage isn't damning enough, the deep dive would not be complete without some financial scandal as well. And as it turns out, the Legion of Christ has more than its fair share. In a 2021 article published on the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists titled "Secret Real Estate Purchases Are a Driving Force Between the Offshore Economy," authors Gibbs and Armendariz ask, what do a beadle, an autocrat's daughter, and a scandal-plagued Catholic order have in common? Each made multi-million-dollar investments in real estate through offshore companies or trusts that disguised the property's ownership. This information came into public view thanks to what is being referred to as the most expansive leak of tax haven files in history. Journalists from the ICIJ obtained more than 11.9 million financial records containing 2.94 terabytes of confidential information from 14 offshore service providers, the enterprise that set up and managed shell companies and trusts in tax havens around the globe. The majority of the documents were created between 1996 and 2020 and included info on more than 29,000 beneficial owners, the ultimate owners of the offshore assets. Now, it is worth noting that owning an offshore company is legal. However, the anonymity that it provides can and is used to cover a variety of illicit activities, including money laundering, tax evasion, terrorism financing, and human trafficking. In the Legion's case, the leaked file exposed the fact that approximately $300 million had been stashed overseas for the Legionaries of Christ, with millions invested with a corporate landlord that evicted struggling U.S. tenants during the pandemic. And another 2021 article titled, "As Catholic Order Fought Sex Abuse Claims, Secret Trusts Devoted to It Poured Millions in American Rental Properties," author Spencer Woodman notes that the confidential records show that the trust became a secret partner in the ownership structure of one Florida apartment complex, working with the landlord to invest $2 million in the complex in 2015. The trusts invested millions more in other modest residential buildings in Florida, Texas, Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois. But the plot thickens. The article goes on to note that soon after the Vatican announced in 2010 that it would seize the operations of the Troubled Order and launch a new investigation, high-profile Legion of Christ operatives began quietly setting up a trio of New Zealand trusts designed to hold money for the Legion. 2 of these trusts, formed shortly after, secretly moved millions of dollars around the world. These 2 trusts would come to hold nearly $3 million in assets devoted to the Legion of Christ at a time when victims of sexual abuse via its priests were seeking financial compensation from the order through lawsuits and through a commission overseen by the Vatican. I'm having a flashback to that one individual who told Maciel's son that they could not pay him the $26 million or whatever it was that he was looking for because they preferred to face the truth head on. But according to these files, they were sitting pretty on a $300 million nest egg. So I think that the truth is probably just the fact that they didn't want to have to give over any of their money, and they needed to maintain the image that they're a poor, destitute, ordinary religious order of people who have taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, not that they are a multi-million-dollar entity. When asked whether the Legion had disclosed these trusts to the Vatican, the order stated that, quote, religious institutes do not have an obligation to send detailed information to the Vatican regarding their internal financial decisions or organization. Allegedly, the Legion had no knowledge of the 2 trusts' operations, but Woodman notes that the 2 trusts were funded by scions of a prominent industrialist family in Mexico, including Father Luis Garza Medina, one of the Legion's top leaders at that time. And while the Legion and Father Garza Medina doubled down and claimed that all the funds were intended to be used for charitable purposes, Garza Medina's sister Roberta, who had been in Regnum Christi during high school, told ICIJ that historically the Legion used offshore structures to divert religious and charitable money for more self-serving purposes. She stated a lot of their money was held outside the Legion by their financiers, by people with power of attorney who are completely faithful to the Legion, so you're never going to find it. And while all of this was playing out, a 2011 civil litigation came to light which accused Legion leadership and other members of defrauding an elderly Catholic woman out of $60 million in charitable donations to the order. Then, police in Milan opened a criminal investigation in 2013 into whether senior Legion clergymen offered a bribe to induce an Italian sexual abuse victim to recant testimony he had given prosecutors. 4 Legion members were charged with attempted extortion and obstruction of justice. The case is pending. And see, this is another reason why I said that I think that there are probably other offenders and other victims out there that we just don't know about. Because clearly, I think that all of this paints the picture of an organization, in my opinion, that has a very vested interest in doing everything it can to protect its identity, protect its assets, and keep everything very close to the vest. A researcher at the Tax Justice Network told ICIJ that trusts allow you to enjoy things when it's the right time, but not have the downsides of technically owning the money. On paper, they can say, I have nothing to do with this. It would seem to me that an organization embroiled in the type of scandal that has plagued every move the Legion of Christ makes would have a vested interest in appearing as destitute and financially incompetent as possible, especially as the investigations and lawsuits continue to pile up. This is not the behavior of a religious order with a vested interest in righting wrongs and addressing issues. It is clear as day that the Legion, or those acting on the Legion's behalf, have an interest in obscuring the truth, which was that, in my opinion, leadership up and down the Legion echelon knew of and likely benefited from the existence of these trusts. A review of numerous leaked records shows that all 3 trusts are extensively linked to the highest levels of the Legion. Prominent Legion officials help govern all 3 trusts. The 3 trusts have the same addresses, the same trustees, are administered by the same trust company, and have accounts at the same Swiss bank. The trust managers hoped they would qualify as purely charitable or religious for the purposes of gaining benefit of New Zealand's tax treaty with the U.S. But the New Zealand tax specialist analyzing the 3 trusts warned that the trust had no express prohibition on the appointment of non-charitable beneficiaries. Those beneficiaries could be changed at any time. All of the articles that I found discussing this issue are linked down below for anyone who would like to go down the rabbit hole some more, but I think we all can get a pretty clear picture of what's going on here. So that concludes the financial segment of this episode. The final aspect that I want to look into concerns the personal anecdotes that people have shared online via social media about the impact that Regnum Christi and the Legionaries of Christ have had on their lives. One individual shared that my parents joined the Chicago YFE when I was 3. I was in ECYD and then attended the pre-candidacy in Rhode Island before being a co-worker at Overbrook Academy. That was 2008. In 2009, I got consecrated and then found out about the father's scandals. All told, I was part of Regnum Christi from birth until 23. It made up the foundation of my faith. When I left Regnum Christi, I left the Catholic Church. Another said, my mother was involved in Regnum Christi and I was involved in ECYD, which was where pretty much all of the daughters of Regnum Christi members would go and have meetings while the Regnum Christi members did their meetings. I was quite young and I don't remember a huge amount, but the entire time we were involved, even as a 10-year-old, I remember a constant, strong sense that everyone there thought that they were better than me and my family. There was just this incredible sense of elitism down to us ECYD girls to our RC moms. Years after we left, after the situation with Father Maciel, my mom and I were talking about it, and even she agrees that there was always a sense of elitism about it. It never felt like we were holy enough, never pure enough. Under a post on a pro-Catholic community where someone asked whether they should accept a position at a Regnum Christi school, an individual shared a heartbreaking account of their experience working with the organization. They wrote, I worked for them for a while. It was absolutely soul-crushing and heartbreaking to watch these wonderful, vibrant, enthusiastic, chatty, and fun girls be broken down systematically. By the end of their second month, they were quiet, reserved, stressed out, anxious, jumpy, and just completely different. All lost weight, no matter how thin they were when they started. Some lost chunks of their hair. Most were on anti-anxiety and antidepressant meds. Anyone considered even mildly overweight, like a size 10, were put on diet meds and had food restricted. Yet, when anyone was sick, they were typically denied helpful meds and extra rest. That said, I adored the girls I came to know, even though I was always aware that they couldn't speak freely with me. Some had awful things happening at home and found ways to ask me for help, and I always complied. Tricky, because I knew they would get in trouble for talking openly to me. I know a lot of them have left Regnum Christi and are doing much better, but I still worry for others. Some of the advisors, instructors, and professors who were also RC had serious mean streaks. They found joy in creatively belittling the girls and their own peers. I remember one incident when an advisor I knew pretty well asked me a question about a group of girls, and I said they were all super nice and friendly when I talked to them. Her response was, yeah, well, of course they are. They have to be. And then cackled and tried to take it back. On another post, another young woman shared her harrowing experience with Regnum Christi and the Legionaries. She wrote, I was raised in a really benign part of the Catholic Church, but the Regnum Christi was heavily involved in my school, so I eventually became involved with them. I was a part of ECYD for a while, and they were the main reason I walked away from the church. The priest in charge of my school and the local youth groups was somewhat young, and I developed a close relationship with him around the age of 12. I trusted him completely and would confide in him for anything that bothered me, only to realize later I was being groomed by him. I didn't have the language back then to express this, but I did know his behavior towards me was far from appropriate. Hugs, kisses, touching my leg/thigh as we spoke, etc. Luckily, I realized what was happening, and I was at a place where I could somewhat speak up about it and keep my distance, but he was kept around even after raising complaints about it. Realizing this was happening really affected me and the way I saw the church. That's only one aspect of the bad experiences I had with them. There were also the mentality that the only purpose and the expected results of the youth groups were getting more vocations, literally said to me by a consecrated woman, which meant heavily influencing teens and preteens into priesthood and consecrated life. I personally know people who were sent to their apostolic schools, pre-seminary type of thing, when they were as young as 12 years old, and were kept there until they were old enough to be ordained and consecrated. Also, looking back, I find it incredibly disturbing that even though a lot of very real accusations had come up against the founder, there was still an insane level of reverence towards him. I see them as a cult within the church and strongly believe they should have been disbanded after the truth about Maciel came out. But they bring a ton of money to the church, so of course, that won't happen. And the final personal experience I'll share was posted on another pro-Catholic forum in which Catholics were expressing concerns about Legionary of Christ priests infiltrating their religious academic clubs and activities. Someone said, "My family and myself had extremely negative experiences with them, and many families we know have had far worse. Marriages have ended, seminarians turned away to agnosticism and alcoholism. One person I know committed suicide, though the last one obviously couldn't be blamed on the Legion. Those that were his friends simply suspect it did not help. The truth is that Father Maciel founded an order to satiate his perverted desires. The resulting structures and even emphasized spirituality thus naturally protect a lot of corruption at all levels of the thing and promote the cult-like mentality mentioned elsewhere in this thread. Individuals in the order can be devout, and some are doing good things in the church. Indeed, that's part of the insidiousness of the whole thing. The Legion uses individuals like that who are either gullible or willfully ignorant to portray themselves as a positive force in the church where they still cause great harm." So if you have been following along with my deep dive into Opus Dei, there may be a few lingering questions in your mind, not the least of which would be, did Maciel and Jose Maria Escriva, the founder of Opus Dei, know each other? I have scrubbed the internet looking for an indication that they interacted, but there are no public records of any interactions between the two. However, as I was looking for accounts and testimonies from individuals who had left Regnum Christi and the Legionaries of Christ, I not infrequently noted that the two organizations were often mentioned side by side. In addition to that, I did come across a few first-hand accounts from former members of Opus Dei who alleged that Maciel copied aspects of Opus Dei's constitution and incorporated them into Regnum Christi, such as the 5 fields of apostolate, outlines for circles, etc., as well as the general vibe and appearance of Opus Dei centers. In that same vein, in the book Vows of Silence by Barry and Renner, the authors note that, quote, "The Legion of Christ, much smaller and not nearly as well known as Opus Dei, has a similar kind of messianic Hispanic spirituality and an unswerving fidelity to the Pope. Both groups believe in money and power to advance the aims of the Church. They work hard to recruit Orthodox Catholics and view each other as rivals. The Legion has an affiliated organization, Regnum Christi, that claims tens of thousands of laymen and women, as well as deacons and priests. They are Maciel's cadre for infiltrating and re-Christianizing existing Catholic organizations. Maciel claims the idea for Regnum Christi came to him in 1949. Several ex-legionaries say he borrowed the lay apostolate idea from Opus Dei in the 1960s and took the name from a defunct European pious association." I think that is really, really interesting and kind of funny because so much of Opus Dei, from its statutes to the way members are expected to behave to the member hierarchy and structure, were all facets that Escriva basically copycat took from much older religious institutions from like the Middle and Dark Ages. There's nothing new under the sun here, nothing original. Everybody's just copying each other, trying to find, in my view, a new way to bring in more money and more clout for whatever their expressed goal would be, which according to these authors was to re-Christianize existing Catholic organizations. In the book The Pope's War by Matthew Fox, Fox states that, quote, "Father Marcial Maciel's Legion of Christ was a favorite of Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. So enamored of Father Maciel was JP2 that he invited him on this plane on several occasions when traveling to South America. The two organizations, Opus Dei and the Legionaries, have much in common. Indeed, the Pope saw in them the same light, with Maciel's group boasting of its roots in Mexico and Escriva's in Spain. Both were in bed with aristocratic millionaires, extremely hierarchical, extremely patriarchal, admiring of uber-right causes, and run very tightly. In fact, Maciel's had a special twist to it. A vow was demanded of its members that they never criticize Maciel or their other superiors, and that they report anyone who did. Secrecy trumped everything. Spying was part of the vow. Both were fully committed to papalatry. Whatever the Pope says goes. They made the perfect vanguard for new anti-Vatican II religious movements." It's interesting to me that two totally different organizations with two different founders could still exhibit many of the same sectarian characteristics that have left so many people scarred. I think that there is an interesting conversation to be had if we can stand to ask why. What were the conditions that not only permitted but appeared to approve the creation of these cults of personality that existed in these religious organizations? And can we positively determine that those conditions are no longer in place? I think that the answers to those questions may stray into a unique conversation, but it's not one that I am prepared to engage with in this episode. What I will conclude with is a quote from the book that I referenced earlier, Sex, Priests, and Secret Codes, the Catholic Church's 2,000-year paper trail of sexual abuse, which discusses the Roman Catholic Church's sex abuse crisis, but which I also think hints at the conditions that allow organizations like the Legionaries of Christ and Opus Dei to persist. The authors, Sipe et al., noted that clergy sexual abuse of minors and vulnerable adults has occurred from the earliest centuries. It has been known to church authorities and is a predictable but highly unfortunate feature of clerical life. It has been denied and hidden by bishops and popes who have consistently acted in a conspiratorial manner to prevent instances of abuse from becoming publicly known, especially to law enforcement authorities. Such behavior patterns shock Catholics and non-Catholics alike. They are perplexed as to how the Catholic Church, with its tradition of strict and unbending sexual morality, can, at the same time, appear to not only tolerate it, but enable thousands of sexually dysfunctional clerics with little or no honest regard for the physical, emotional, and spiritual devastation of their countless victims. Yet this sad state of affairs is predictable, but certainly not acceptable within the much broader context of the institutional church's traditional image of itself. It is my opinion that there is an institutionalized cancer within the Catholic Church that infected it from the beginning. And I can't pretend to have a solution to that issue because I believe that abuse will always thrive in an environment that fails to recognize all human beings as equals and instead prefers to cater to the human ego and pride. So for now, this is where I will conclude things. I would like to know, what is your perspective of organizations like the Legionaries of Christ and Opus Dei? Do you think that we've seen the end of the Legionaries' scandals? Do you think that the Vatican has intentionally shielded problematic people like Maciel and Escriva because of the money that they brought in? In your view, does the Roman Catholic Church have any credibility left? Do you think that the Church is capable of change? And what would meaningful, substantial, and sincere change look like? Have you had experiences with either of these organizations? And if so, were they positive or negative? I'm looking forward to reading the thoughts and comments that you have. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. That helps my channel out a lot. Details to contact me and support my work are down in the description of this video. And if you made it to the end of this episode, congratulations. You are a rock star and I appreciate you. Until next time, stay blessed and remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum.